Hey, show hosts, how can you be able to put the spotlight on your guests, but still make sure your audience knows that you're an expert worth paying attention to? That's what we're going through today, right here, right now, on Air Brands.
You are now tuned in to the On Air Brands podcast.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the On Air Brand Show. I am Todd Giannattasio, along with my co-host, Amber Fuhriman. Amber, are you in witness protection? Where are you today?
I am. I can't tell you. I can't. No, I'm in California for a conference. It's time to learn and grow. And of course, I was like, I can't miss my Wednesdays. So we're doing it from a beautiful hotel room.
Yes, looks lovely for those of you guys who are watching on Facebook or YouTube. And if you're catching the audio version on a podcast platform, you're not missing much. It is a very plain background hotel room. But thank you very much for taking the time out there to still make the show. I appreciate that. I knew on a personal basis that you were traveling, but I hadn't thought about the show. And then when we got on today, I was like, oh, wow, thank you so much for being here. Normally you're out, saving people in court when you're not able to make it. So, it's great that you're so dedicated to the show, and I love that, and I appreciate it, and I'm grateful for you.
Oh yeah, no, I'm so like, I enjoy it. I almost feel like, first of all, where else would I learn how to market? We were just having this conversation. I do have to say though, I have to tap into my Todd when I record, because I find that every single screenshot of myself is awful, like Amber's face and weird contorted things. And if I could just learn how to pause for a second and smile like Todd in between and after sentences, then I'd be good to go.
Well, I'll tell you,
it's an art.
I do feel the same way about myself, though, about that every screenshot is awkward. There's never a good one. And so usually if you have a guest, and what this segues nicely into the topic for today for our show hosts, is if you have a guest and you want to make sure that you get a good screenshot of the episode, normally at the end of the show, the guest typically will smile as they're saying goodbye. So keep that in mind. So as you end, keep that last 2 seconds where when you say goodbye or you end it, know that will be a good spot to pause where they're most likely smiling and you're most likely smiling. Or my other trick is that I just take 2 screenshots of the episode, one where the guest has a good face on, and then a separate one, and then it's easy because the screenshots are the same size. So in Photoshop, you just put them on top of each other and then delete half of the wrong one, and then you end up with a nice looking side by side. So those are 2 little tips for our show hosts out there who are not always super happy with their faces in the screenshots.
Right. It was really interesting for me because I don't know if anybody else is like this, but when I first started my podcast, I used to look around at all the cool things that people did with their guests and their podcasts and be like, man, my guests never do anything cool like that on their own. And then I realized that none of it's on their own. Everything is planned by the host. And so it's so crazy because the moment that I realized that it was all staged and planned, part of me was jealous and the other part of me felt like I had just found out that Santa Claus wasn't real.
Yeah. Earmuffs, kids, earmuffs.
Kids.
So what are we talking about today? The topic of being a good host. Our show here is a little different format because we don't really have guests. It's the 2 of us co-hosting. But when you do have your own show, which you have, where you do bring on guests, it's of course you want to shine the light on the guests the whole time, or most of the time. But at the same time, the reason you have a show is because it's meant to help your business grow and you build a connection with your audience. So how can you really host a show where you're interviewing someone where they get the spotlight, but you're not just seen as this dumb person asking questions who I could never hire or buy products from because you're not the expert?
Yeah, I love this question and this topic so much because I know it's something that I really struggled with when I started. And if I go back and listen to some of my first episodes, I remember thinking to myself, Amber, do you ever shut up? Let your guests talk, right? And you think I need this is my show. I need to talk. People need to know that I exist. What we forget is that there's this incredible unconscious power in connecting with other people. And so just by having that person on your show, you're borrowing their credibility, and you will forever be known as the person that connected your audience to that person. So you're already getting that credibility piece from them. This is also, though, why I host solo episodes. So I'll keep a notebook next to me, and as the guest says something that I really want to expand on, if it's relevant to the conversation, I'll expand. If I think that it's going to drive the conversation in an amazing place where me and the guest can have a great topic that the listeners will learn from, then I'll definitely expand. If it's not that, and it's just a idea that popped in my head based upon what the guest said, then I keep a notebook and I do my solo episodes based upon that. And that's a really cool way to highlight your guests a second time. Hey, I was doing this interview with Todd Giannattasio, and he said this, and it made me think of this, and I really wanted to do this solo episode with this. If you want to check out that episode, here's the link to it. And it's a great way to weave everything back together this way. If anybody missed our pre-planning call.
Yeah, Amber was using her hands to talk about fraudulent embezzlement, and was doing a little luau with her hands, and so now we're using that as our sign language for how to embezzle money. But
yeah, don't do that, kids.
Yeah, I think sprinkling in those episodes is a great idea. The solo episodes, and someone who does this great is Pat Flynn. Started doing this just recently. I say recently, a few months ago. Definitely this year, I think, where he does an interview. I don't know what day his stuff releases, but let's say Tuesday he releases an hour-long interview episode on a specific topic, and then on Friday he releases a 15-minute episode where he reflects back on what that conversation was, and he brings in more of his personal experience so that he can really let the guest shine, but then also add in his insight in a separate episode. And what is also super cool about how he does it, the last one I caught, I think it was last week, he had an expert come on in an interview where they were talking about, I think it was lead generation for high ticket sales or something along those lines, whatever the topic was. And so he didn't interrupt or derail the person he was interviewing. He let them shine in their expertise and go through all of their advice and all that stuff. And then on Friday, he came on and said, that stuff was awesome. It was a little more advanced than what my audience is used to hearing. And most of the people who follow me are not really at that point yet. So here are 3 nuggets that I pulled out of my interview with him on Tuesday, and how you can use them in your business if you're not at that point yet. And I thought that was super cool. So I think, sprinkling in solo follow-up episodes to either highlight insights, pull in your own experience, or really translate the guest's expertise into what really will connect with your audience. I think that's an awesome way to do it as well. And I think another way too is in your interviews, when you're interviewing someone, is not to just interview, but be proactively having a conversation, right? And I think that's another thing. Some hosts are very rigid with just asking questions, which can be great, but I think making it much more conversational is also a way to show your listeners that, hey, I'm not just like blind. I didn't just make a list of questions that I'm going to ask here and then that's it. But, I'm guiding this conversation. I'm leading the guest to extract their expertise in a way that makes sense for you as the listener. And I think that's another powerful way to make sure that you're not just seen as someone who's asking questions and then going on mute.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you say that, because when I first started my show, I wanted it to be conversational. I also knew that I wanted to ask questions about success and failure and comfort zones. And so I had those questions that I had planned out, and I had created this agenda where it was going to be like the first half was going to be about their business, and then the second half was going to be about comfort zones and success and all of these things. Well, as we know, well-laid plans, right? So what would happen is we would naturally dig into those topics of comfort zones and success and failure. But damn it, I had an agenda and I had to follow it. And so then I would get to those questions at the end and I'd be like, oh, but I have to ask these. And I would have people reaching out to me going, the second half of your show just feels wrong because it feels like you are just asking questions for the purpose of asking questions.
Right.
Because like you already talked about this, right?
Yeah.
So I quit having questions that were pre-scripted out, with the exception of my core question, which is, what does success mean to you?
Yeah.
And then we start and just go from there. The other side of this is just true conversation skills, right? We often, as humans, find ourselves in conversations where instead of listening to what the other person is saying, we're thinking about what we're going to say next, which misses the whole opportunity to dig into what your guest is saying. And if you throw away the agenda and you just say, my only purpose for this 30, 45, 60 minutes is to connect with this person and let this conversation go wherever it's supposed to go, then you have the opportunity to capitalize on some things that might be golden nuggets that you never would have gone down that rabbit hole. So I think really honing in your communication skills when you're with your family, when you're with your friends, when you're not on a podcast, of when your mind starts to wander, as it always does, of, oh, that was cool, I want to talk about that next. Write that down somewhere, like take a note of it, but don't focus on it. Exactly. Don't focus on it, because if you do, then you'll miss everything they say after it, because all your mind is thinking about is, oh, I want to comment on that. I want to comment on that. And then I wanted to say, I know you and I have talked about Zach's tactical leadership.
Yeah, that was the other
Zach
example I was going to bring up. Yeah.
Yeah. So he does an episode with somebody, and then before they end, he does this tactical leadership question with them. And so the way he formats it is he takes the episode and posts it on Monday, and then he talks about the solo episode, which is his nuggets, which he posts on Wednesday. And then he takes that tactical leadership, which he posts on Friday, and that keeps people engaged all week long, which I thought was a really interesting way to do it.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I like definitely having a notepad so you can jot down some chicken scratch. And, some people call it the parking lot, right? It's just like, here's ideas that I want to come back to. I do it during regular meetings as well. But knowing like, oh, that's a good idea. I don't want to interrupt her and derail this, but I think we can pull on that thread. Let me jot it down, right? And one of those things the thread that I want to pull that I just jotted down on my pad here is the power of intention before you start a show. And it's something I don't know if I've mentioned it on the air before, and I could be better about it recently, but typically when I'm doing interview shows, or yesterday I was on a panel, when I do things like that, I just take like the 2-3 minutes before I click into the Zoom meeting or into the StreamYard meeting. I just sit down, I take a couple deep breaths, and I think I set the intention for, this is going to be a great conversation. And it's going to deliver so much value to anyone who is able to listen. And I'm grateful to bring this value from our guest today to the audience that it finds. And, it's definitely a woo-woo thing to do, but I think just setting that intention clears, one, I believe that it does put a powerful attraction into the universe and makes things better. But I also think that just from a mental perspective, we're all running around doing a million things. And when you hop onto something, like to just take 2 minutes to clear your mind of all the other BS that's going on and running around, having a notepad so that you're not constantly thinking in the back of your head, but just clearing your mind, setting an intention. I'm going to be present here for the next 30 or 60 minutes or however long your shows are, is going to help you, in the micro, in that moment of being more focused and more intentional with how you have the conversation. But also I believe that putting that intention out to the universe is going to actually create a more powerful episode and attract more listeners to your show.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I started doing, and I had done this a little bit before, and then when we talked to David Meltzer, he talked about a way that he preps for interviews, and I thought, man, I really like that, where he does kind of a guest rundown sheet of, okay, if the conversation stalls, then these are some really cool things that this guest has done that I can ask questions about. Now, either you can prepare that if you have a virtual assistant, your VA can prepare it, whatever needs to happen in order for you to have some fallback questions, because we've all had that guest where you have in your mind that you're going to have this conversational podcast and they're answering with yes or no questions. And you've got to figure out a way to get them talking about something that they're really passionate about so that they'll start that conversation. So having those backup questions of, okay, this person likes to do this This is, you know, what they've written about. This is their TED Talks. Just having them there is so powerful. With that being said, for so many people, and I know I always thought this, I always thought that podcasting was just starting a mic, opening up a Zoom room, and having a conversation. And you can run a podcast like that for a little bit, but after a while, everything starts to be the same because you don't know how to dig deep into your guests because you don't know anything about them.
Yeah.
So prepping for your podcast is the most valuable thing that you can do in creating powerful conversations.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think, you know, depending on your show, and I've talked about this before when it comes to like fantasy football and stuff like that in the past for myself, right? Where people used to say, well, how do you have time for fantasy football where you have to spend all this time every week planning, researching all the players and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, I actually don't spend any extra time on fantasy football because just every morning I spend 20 minutes listening to ESPN radio and then that's what I do. So I don't have to do any extra research. You know, the amount of time I spend consuming sports is way down compared to what it used to be, which is why my record shows it. But when you have a podcast, it's obviously about a topic that you're passionate about. And so that's, I think, the importance too of staying in your lane. So when it's things that you're passionate and knowledgeable about, you're going to be naturally more curious about asking questions and be able to have better conversations, be a better conversationalist. But, you know, there's also, you know, you're out there at an NLP program right now as, you know, one of the coaches for the program. And NLP, for our listeners who aren't familiar, even though we mention it pretty much every episode, it's neuro-linguistic programming. And so it's about communication. So what are some tips like from the NLP world that, you know, we can snag out to improve our conversations and communication during our shows with our guests?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is understanding that communication styles are like different languages to people. So I'll explain what that means. We've talked about the different predicates that people use to show how they process information. Predicates being verbs like look, see, hear, things to that effect. So there's certain ways that people process information. I'll make this really quick. They process it auditorily. Can you hear what I'm saying? Does it sound like it would be good for you? They process it auditory digital with that voice in their head. What do you think about that? Does that make sense to you? They process information visually. Can you see how that would work for you? Look at this proposal, right? Look at this podcast. If you've ever heard anybody say, I'm watching a podcast, that doesn't always mean that they're watching it. That could just be the way that they're processing the words that they're hearing.
Yeah.
And then you have your kinesthetics, and those are your feelers. Those are the people who they feel what you're saying, right? Those are the people who you get it. You just have this feeling. So the more content you consume of your guests, the more you know how they communicate and how they process information. So that when you're crafting your questions, you know, if you were to go to a guest who is very analytical and very visual and say, hey, does it sound like something that you could talk about? They're going to be like, I have no idea what you just said to me.
Yeah.
But if you go to them and said, hey, let's see if we can have a conversation and make this make sense for our audience, they're going to be like, let's go. I'm in. Because now you're talking their language. English sounds the same. It's the same English words,
Yeah.
But in their brain, it's not even comprehending. So this is where prepping comes in. And this is something that just without going through all of the trainings that NLP involves, which if you're a podcaster, you absolutely should, because it's the communication style.
Oh, we should launch a course, NLP for podcasters.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Let's do it. The best advice I can give you is just mirror their words. If they're saying a lot of words like look and see, then don't turn around and ask them questions about making sense or sounding right. Like, use the words that your guest is using and you will have a much better conversation.
Yeah, that's cool. And I like, you know, my tips for guest prep too and it depends on, you know, the volume of episodes you have and how you recruit your guests. But like one of my favorite ways to recruit guests is when they are a guest on another show that I already listened to, because that's the research. Again, I'm not doing any additional work in my life. I'm doing things that I'm already doing. I'm already subscribed to 40 other shows that I listen to. So when I hear a guest talking about something that I find intriguing and I think they'd be a good guest on my show, that's where I will reach out to them. And I've done the prep already. I've already heard them on another show, right? And then you're familiar with, oh, this person is, competent to have these kind of conversations. I like their style. They seem like the kind of personality that I would get along with and have fun with. They'd make for a great episode with me as well. And then that's where, again, I'm always looking for ways to create leverage and repurpose things and save time. And it's, make sure your topics are within your lane of either expertise or at least curiosity and competency, so that you can ask questions and ask questions that make sense. And then second, find guests that you are familiar with, whether because they're in your network already. That's another easy tip. Start with people who are in your network and you're familiar with already, so that there'll be good conversations with you. But then recruiting people who you've heard on other shows that you're like, oh, I could get along with this person.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the power of a really well-crafted interview form. What's really cool is that people actually like to talk about themselves if you give them the opportunity to do it. And I don't do a pre-interview. I mean, you and I, Todd, barely do a pre-interview for any of these episodes, because what we found when we first started co-hosting this podcast together, we scheduled like 30 minutes to prep. And what we found is that the content in those pre-interviews was often so good that we're like, we don't want to waste this in a pre-interview. And you can never recreate that.
Right.
Like, have you guys ever had that experience where you get recording and you're like, man, I wish that I could have recorded the first part of the conversation that we were having before, because that's where all the good stuff was, because your brain is like, we've already talked about this.
I had a guest. What did you say? Josh posted a couple months ago. It was like the most embarrassing or worst thing you did. This is not really embarrassing, just more disappointing than anything. But I had a guest on one of my shows last year where we hopped on and I was using Ecamm. So we hopped on Skype, and like out of the gate, we were just fine. Like, it was like it's someone who I've known for like 10 years. We both got into the digital marketing space around the same time, but in different industries. We followed similar paths from a strategy standpoint. And so we guessed, this was before podcast, we posted on each other's blogs in 2011, 12. And then, we didn't really keep in touch too much over the years. And then I was like, yo, man, I'd love to have you on this new show I'm doing. So, I mean, we got on Skype and we just like hit the ground running for like 20 minutes. And I was like, oh my God, dude. I'm like, I never started the episode because like I wasn't like, oh, let me record when we say hello. And we just went off. And I was like, oh man, I can't believe I didn't I should have just hit record and then like not had an intro and just done like a random intro later and be like, hey guys, welcome to the show. It starts off out of the gate, but it just was too good not to record. But that was one of the things where, we just got on and things took off so quick. And then like finally there was a pause in the conversation. I was like, well, dude, I guess I'll hit record now. And he's like, and he didn't say anything, but I could see it in his face where he was like, I thought we were recording already. Like, so, but
I learned that lesson the hard way as well. And what I've done is set my Zoom or StreamYard automatically downloads, depending, but to record automatically. And then there's this magical thing called editing that makes us all sound fantastic, that you get to fit that in wherever it fits in the episode and make it sound like it was all planned. So it's automagical, right?
Yeah.
What I will say though is, some of the coolest things are doing like a really cool pre-interview form and saying, hey, what's 3 things that people don't know about you? And some people are like, hey, that's cheating. Well, it's not cheating. Like, it's better than a 30-minute pre-interview call where you find this out on your own and then you don't have anything to talk about, right?
Right.
But here's my point of caution for you guys. If you're going to do this, please, when the guest tells you in the interview something really cool that they did, don't be surprised and let them know that you didn't actually read the interview form. I had that happen to me once with a guest where I was telling them about, when people ask that, what's 3 things that are really interesting about you that people might not know, I always talk about the things that are business related or that are growth related. And one of them is always my 24-hour obstacle course race. So we were going through things and it came to a topic where I could fit that in. And I said, yeah, just like my 24-hour obstacle course race. And they were like, oh my gosh, mind blown. And I was like, you clearly did not read what you asked me to fill out. So if you're going to ask your guests to fill something out like that, just take the time to have it prepped and ready and know what's going on. But that's a great way to have some conversational topics that are interesting to your guest.
Yeah. And I think, you bring up, what's your take on this? I've heard this said about interviewers, but I think it came from the world of lawyering, which you are in. And it's that great lawyers don't ask questions they don't know the answer to. And I've heard people say that about interviews too, but I can't really buy into that because I think that's how naturally good conversations come about.
Yeah, no, I would tweak that just a little bit. I would say that great lawyers and great interviewers don't ask questions that they don't want to know the answer to.
Oh, nice. I like that. That's good. And yeah, that's good. I like that. So, all right. So let's recap here quickly some tips that we have for you guys as show hosts when you have a guest on to make sure that you're not just seen as someone who's rattling off questions, but you're also an expert that your audience should be seeing as an authority. First, we started off with some screenshot tips so that your face doesn't look super awkward. Amber, let's get a smile for the show. Both of us. 1, 2, 3.
No.
And then to do some in between solo episodes from when you have a guest, then you could do following up on that topic, recapping it, translating it from what the interviewer talked about to something that's more specifically relevant for your audience, making sure that you're conversational and not just asking a question and being quiet, but you're driving a conversation. And a way to be seen as an authority in the space too is that although you're asking the questions, but guide and lead the conversation, but let your guest be the one who's sharing their expertise. And, that makes it, you're the leader who's extracting that information for your audience, but you're not just asking a question that's written on a piece of paper and then sitting back on mute. We talked about the power of intention here. So before you get on, just take a deep breath, clear your mind, be present so that you can have an active conversation. You can be proactively listening and keep a notepad out so you can jot down some simple things in your little parking lot of ideas without your mind getting too distracted that you can come back to and pull the threads on if you want. And if things stall, making sure that you have a list of a couple cool things you like about your guest or that your guest has accomplished so that if they start answering short on your questions, you can pull those up for them. Making sure that you're prepping enough that you have curiosity or understanding of the conversation, or like I like to say, just stay in your lane of expertise. Make sure you do your guest prep and understanding. Easy trick for that is bring people on as guests that you're already familiar with in your network or that you've heard on other shows. Make sure you have a well-crafted interview form pre-show that you actually read the answers to, and don't ask questions that you don't want to know the answers to. Wow, what a great episode. I didn't realize that the recap would take me so long to hit there, but there we go. And Rob, there's our show notes. We could just transcribe that right into the description and get this cranked out quicker. But I'd love to hear what everyone else thinks. If they want to comment on facebook.com/onairbrands live is where we stream the show, or you can go to onairbrands.com/show to subscribe and get in touch with us. And if you want to hear Amber's solo and interview episodes where she is an expert podcast host, check out morethancorporate.com, and we will catch you guys on the next episode.
Bye, guys.
You are now tuned in to the On Air